Hi, this is David Henry Young. I'm going to read a short story I wrote. I was on my second tour in South Vietnam when I first saw Tron. It was during the monsoon season of 1970. He was a slight 6-year-old boy wearing only black silk pajama bottoms, his naked upper body shivering ever so slightly as he stood there, staring at me through the steady, cold downpour near the swollen river where our truck convoy was stopped, waiting to cross. We would wait for hours as the river slowly lowered its banks and the rain would slow to a simple, cold drizzle. As I monitored the radio traffic, I would glance back at this small human standing, staring wordlessly at me. I noticed Tron's feet were partially covered in the red clay puddles near the German-run orphanage where he lived. His little feet were bare, and the lightly falling rain gave his body a cold shine, though without the sun hiding up behind the low overcast clouds. He had walked out from the orphanage to look at the trucks. He chose mine, which was the command vehicle with its sides adorned with various antennas and its truck bed open to the elements. And I thought I understood him. I had always loved to watch trucks go by when I was a small boy, though now I viewed him with the quiet vigilance born from the apprehensive stories of grenades delivered from a child's basket as they walked close to slowly moving convoys passing through small villages. Looking at Tron from time to time, I noticed his shiny black hair was neatly parted, almost to the individual strands as the floating wetness made its way down his hair and onto his slick, dripping face. His eyes were as black as coal, and it reminded me of the anthracite delivered loudly by the big blackened trucks as the coal rushed down the shiny metal chute into the basement of my childhood home on Beach Street. We lived 3.5 blocks from Wollaston Beach, part of Quincy Bay, 12 miles south of Boston, Massachusetts. It was Tron's quiet stance in that rain that provoked such a loud memory in my heart. I thought I understood him. We were both a long way from home. His had been destroyed, along with his family, because they would not give rice to those we were fighting. And my home was wrapped in memories of some faraway place, far, far away territory we called the world. Tron continued to stand there in the cold rain, his body trembling and his eyes soundlessly bleeding like a lost sheep, with the intent of seeking shelter from his terribly lonely moment. Mercy comes in many forms. I signaled him to come over with a wet hand and cold fingers stretched out from underneath my soaked poncho, the rain dripping off my brimmed hat from the jungle, as I turned my head towards the locked tailgate of my truck. I hoisted Tron up with my outstretched arms. He was so light and fragile, and a streak of joy coursed through me like used to happen to me as a young boy when I heard our national anthem played late at night when the local television station would sign off. It would bring chills up and down my spine and tears to my eyes. And it was always a private moment that I never shared with anyone. And now I felt the same thing, though no anthem was being played and I didn't see any setting sun streaked silver jet racing higher and higher to the spoken words of the prayer poem High Flight, touching the face of God. I simply picked Tron up and hid him under my poncho and fed him chocolate and as much warmth and dryness as I could provide. It seemed like a long time standing there together, me monitoring the radios and he falling asleep, his little arms around me as the shivering stopped and his trembling faded away. It may have been, hours, but the time came for our convoy to continue on to the 5th Marines Combat Base at Anwa. They were in need of ammunition, food, dry socks, new boots, and all the other things a mobile combat team needs to operate in hostile territory. I gently nudged Tron awake and lifted him down off the truck. And we waved silently to each other, smiling as I turned my head towards the now receded river to cross. This meeting with little Tron was repeated 5 times over the following few weeks. During that time, I saw where he lived and met several of the nice nuns and one of the doctors who cared for him and the other orphans. Our meetings were emotional, the kind where joy is mingled with a very quiet, intense sadness. Tron gave me a wallet-sized photograph of himself that the nuns must have taken. As things worked out, it was our last meeting. And I learned what the word poignant meant. I knew very little Vietnamese. He, no English. Our communication was in hugs, warmth found beneath a silk poncho, and from the kind of smiles between eyes that do not know words. And I knew I loved him, and had the wild thought rise up out of my heart like an unrestrained, ascending joy that I wanted somehow, someday to adopt him. It reminded me of why I had volunteered to come to Vietnam in the first place, to simply help a people oppressed. And I remembered a senior high school assembly in 1966 where the then freshman U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy, addressed us about his recent fact-finding tour of South Vietnam as a member of the Senate Subcommittee on Refugees and Displaced Persons. Senator Kennedy was passionate about his work and what he had found the conditions were like in South Vietnam, and pleaded for our understanding and help. It had made a great impression on me, and yet now, here in this strange, poor place, I found conflict in my heart. During the times with Tron, I thought much about the world, as we termed it, a far-off place 13,000 miles away in the memory of a young Marine sergeant. And yet now, a very close place in the mud near Tron's orphanage, surrounded by opposing hostile forces, more intimate and dangerous than cold rain from the worst a monsoon storm could deliver. The world, a strange place, a really strange place. And up to now, for me, a place always somewhere else. Away from here, away from the mud, away from the pelting rain, away from the waiting to continue to live another day, or to die suddenly, violently, mysteriously, waiting for a flooding river to recede. And I thought of a movie I had seen starring Marlon Brando called The Ugly American. Through that, I had come to understand that there was another world other than where I had come from, one we Americans called the Third World. Places we deemed less by their very natures, not as good as where I had come from, and not as worthy or valuable except for our own use at their expense. This was a very painful thing for me to remember. And in that moment, atop my rain-soaked and red muddy truck, I saw arrogance, my arrogance, hiding inside me like a germ that had until now had its full fiery effect and reign in my whole young life. And it stared back at me with a confident, mature snicker embedded in an old mustache I had never grown. My arrogance was so quiet, so innate, so unseen by my thinking my home to be the world, and Tron's home, what some kind, good people had made for him, was to me only a stop in a red clay mud on a lonely road to a combat base near a swollen, rushing river. The arrogance of me thinking that I'm from the world and Tron was from where? He was from here and now. He was from here and now. And I saw that I was the alien and he the native. He was the resident, and I was a strange traveler standing, soaking in the rain, atop a big steel truck that I thought fascinated him, because I was an American, big and strong and rich, and yet I saw I was as lost and wet and maybe as lonely as he. I carried his picture in my wallet for years, like a luscious bunch of grapes on the vine destined for good wine. But his black and white photograph faded from age and bitterness. And one day in rage, pain, and tears, I ripped it up, threw it up into the wind that blew down Beach Street, a hot, steaming summer wind that carried the pieces of Tron's visage onto the gutter-lined hard granite blocks, while some other pieces floated down onto the asphalt, where passing cars ran hot tires over them on their way to the beach. That luscious bunch of grapes, filled with loving desire and hope, was now found to be shrunken raisins, good only for a cheap box of cereal, a grotesque cereal, whose raisins resembled sickly-looking shrunken heads, bobbing in old milk and flaccid pieces of flaked corn cows would eat. Like Langston Hughes's poem, A Dream Deferred, my dream of adopting Tron and living and loving him forever had been dashed. On May 15, 1970, after my first night at home from Vietnam and released from the Marine Corps, staying with my recently separated mother from my alcoholic father, I awoke from a 14-hour sleep to turn on the television and see my first Huntley Brinkley news broadcast in over 2 years. Chet Huntley's lead story was the report about a German-run orphanage at An Hoa, South Vietnam, administered by sweet nuns and kindly doctors doing God's work. The orphanage had been attacked by the North Vietnamese army. They killed all the children, all the nuns, all the doctors, and burned the orphanage to the ground. I stared at the TV for a long time, unaware of any other news. I was alone. My mother was out for the evening. I felt nauseous and went in and lay down on her bed. The walls began to slowly spin and then speeded up to a dizzying movement. I closed my eyes as burning, salty tears streamed down my face, and I heard someone screaming for a long time. I fought the impulse to throw up, like the time I had to pick up a fellow Marine's head that a .50 caliber round had split neatly into 6 pieces. It was like a steaming pie of gray brains and white bones, with stark red blood flowing profusely, fresh from the oven of hell. The Marine private had simply been mowing the lawn our colonel wanted grown behind the hooches that faced our backside defensive perimeter. Another Marine had removed this .50 caliber machine gun from its gun mount after returning with the convoy that I had just finished my shower from. He forgot to clean his weapon, leaving a round in the chamber ready for firing. I was on the command truck, preceding all the gun trucks moving along the road that went slowly along the backside of the compound where the cleaning stations for the machine guns were situated. I was on my way to be dropped off at the showers. The monsoon season had ended, and what had been deep red mud had now turned into choking dust. I was filthy, and I was glad to be first in the showers. As our truck passed along the inner compound road, I saw the young Marine trying so hard to mow the colonel's scrub grass with an old wooden lawnmower. I didn't know him, but knew that he had only recently come into country. And new guys sometimes pulled such duty, like mowing a lawn. A few minutes later, I was in the showers with my friend the corpsman of the convoy when we heard the single report sound of weapons fire. We looked at each other wondering what it was. We knew it wasn't a grenade or a mortar, and then we heard the cry, "Corpsman! Corpsman!" We rushed out to the site of the sound, carefully running in our flip-flops and holding our towels in place. And there he was, splayed faceless and headless down. spread-eagled with his hands only inches from that old lawnmower, his head steaming on the sandy lawn, a few feet in front of his outstretched body. This is called death by friendly fire. An accident by all accounts. And I helped my friend pick up the 6 pie pieces of this poor man's head into my towel. I had such an urge to retch and vomit, but forced it down, just as I forced it down on my mother's bed as it slowly began to stop swirling. Tron's death, and all at the orphanage at An Hoa, South Vietnam, near that muddy river, was not from friendly fire. It was very unfriendly, unmerciful, cruel, hateful, and punishing. The world at its worst, and it broke me. And though I knew I was home, I was still in harm's way. David Young, April 2002. Thanks for listening.